I remember the exact moment everything began to change, because for a brief second, the world seemed to hold its breath. It was late afternoon when I escaped down the trail behind the church, as I had since I was 12, when I discovered the only place where the sound of my own thoughts wasn't a sin. Now at 19, this ritual had become my only solace, a silence amid the noise of expectations. My father always said silence was where God spoke loudest, but with me, he seemed absent, or perhaps just tired of trying to mold me. I walked with anger locked in my bones and exhaustion in my soul, tired of smiling when they wanted, of wearing skirts that screamed purity, of pretending not to hear my own thoughts pounding in my mind like prayers in reverse. When I reached the lake, the breeze felt different, heavier, the water darker, and my reflection didn't obey. I blinked. It didn't. I took a deep breath. It turned its head. For a moment my heart raced as if I stood before something sacred, or too profane to explain. I stepped back, but my eyes stayed fixed. The lake's surface gleamed like molten glass, and suddenly he appeared, a young man standing on the other side, in absolute silence, tall, with hair falling slightly over his eyes, as if time had forgotten to touch him. And even without a single sound, my entire body felt it. I knew him, not from church, not from town, but from somewhere so ancient within me that it might not even belong to this world. He didn't smile. He just looked at me with the intensity of someone who sees what others pretend doesn't exist. And in that moment, only in that moment, I felt that everything I'd lived until then had been preparation for this. I should have run, prayed, confessed, but I didn't move, because for the first time, I felt I was exactly where I was meant to be. And if that was a sin, then I finally understood why some chose to burn. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was all imagination, a product of exhaustion, loneliness, or perhaps some buried desire my rule-bound mind had conjured. In a strange way, but it was futile. The lake was still there, and the weight of that young man's gaze clung to me like an invisible scar. I sat at the breakfast table with my parents, pretended to pray with eyes closed, and endured talk of Sunday's sermon with the same mask, of obedience I'd worn since childhood. But inside, something was already in ruins. While my father spoke of the importance of spiritual vigilance, my mind drifted back to the moment my reflection failed. Part of me wanted to doubt, to find a logical, rational, safe explanation, but another part, the deepest, most alive, yearned to return to the lake, to touch it, confront it, understand it. I went back at dusk, when the sky began to change color. The path felt shorter, as if my feet knew the way better than I did. And when I arrived, he was there again, standing as if he'd never left. The same silence enveloped us, but this time, something was different. When I looked at the reflection, it wasn't just him staring back. It was me in another version. A Sheyla with unbound hair, free of the church's modest attire, with a spark in her eyes I'd never seen in my bedroom mirror. That image blinked, and in that same instant, Elijah, that's how he introduced himself, spoke my name. He didn't ask. He knew. A chill ran down my spine. I asked how. He simply said, "Because you've already called me even without knowing." That's when I realized I was crying, not from fear or sadness. It was as if each tear washed away the dust of something ancient within me. Elijah stepped closer to the shore, but his feet didn't touch the water. There was a distance that seemed made of another substance. He said the lake was a portal between what is and what was forgotten, that not everyone could see the true reflection, only those who bore the mark. I laughed nervously, clinging to the last thread of reason. but nothing about him seemed to jest. Nothing in me wanted to retreat. I returned home with weak knees, as if my body knew crossing that threshold had changed everything. I barely slept that night. I dreamed of faces I'd never seen and names I'd never heard, yet they resonated like ancient hymns. For the first time in a long while, I didn't know who I was, and in a way both terrifying and liberating, that gave me a new kind of hope. The nights that followed were like a taut wire stretched across my chest. I went through the motions as always, helped my mother with chores, read the Bible beside my father, smiled at the faithful who came to our home for counsel, prayed before meals. But something in me had crossed the point of no return. It wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. Each day I returned to the lake like one returns to a secret altar, and Elijah was always there, always at the shore, always waiting, always with that gaze that unraveled me effortlessly. He never touched me, but strangely, it was as if he already knew me from within, as if he read my silences with the same ease my father read scripture. In one of those meetings, I asked why only I could see him. Elijah turned his eyes to the water and said, "Because only you still carry the name that was forgotten." When I pressed for an explanation, he smiled sadly, as if longing for something that hadn't yet happened. He told me of an ancient lineage, women who guarded the connection between worlds, not witches nor saints, but bridges. He said this lineage was silenced, erased by the very men who claimed to protect it, and that the blood of those women still flowed in a few, very few, and the lake called them back when the time was right. I wanted to deny it, to call it madness, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down, something in me recognized it all is truth. That night when I returned home, I found my father waiting in the living room. He looked at me as if he already knew, or feared knowing. He asked where I'd been going so often. A lump formed in my throat, but I didn't lie. I said only, the lake, and his face changed. First surprise, then fear, and finally anger. A cold, almost restrained anger, but one I knew well. He ordered me never to go back there, that it was dangerous, that evil things dwelled in that place. When I tried to ask why, he cut me off, said there was nothing to know. You don't need to understand, just obey. But it was too late for that. That same night, in the early hours, I rose quietly, barefoot, and walked to the lake once more. But this time, when I arrived, Elijah wasn't there. The reflection showed only me, but facing away. And then, as if something within the water opened, images began to emerge. Ancient fields, women with intense eyes and hands raised to the sky, and at the center of it all, one of them, with my face. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. A voice, neither Elijah's nor mine, whispered in my mind, "You must remember." And in that moment, facing a truth too impossible to explain, I felt my entire identity shatter, to make way for something far older. The world I knew had begun to crumble, but for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt called. The next morning, the world still looked the same, but I wasn't. The walls of the house, once so familiar, now felt too narrow, as if they couldn't contain the new version of me that had emerged from the lake. My parents noticed. They said nothing, but they were more watchful. My father prayed louder at breakfast, as if trying to exorcise what he already sensed. My mother avoided my gaze, as if she saw in it the reflection of something also within her, but which she'd learned to deny for survival. And I, silent, let time pass, while something inside me took shape. The lake's reflection had shown me fragments of a memory that wasn't exactly mine, but now ran through my veins like a summons I needed to understand. I needed to know why Elijah knew me, what this mark meant, why my reflection came alive, and why my father seemed to fear it so much. In the days that followed, I kept returning to the lake, unsure if Elijah would reappear. And then, one afternoon, he did. But there was something different in him, an urgency in his gaze, as if time were running out. He told me the lake was awakening because my presence had recognized it, and that this wouldn't go unnoticed, not among the living, nor among those who dwell at the threshold. I demanded answers, wanted to know who I was, where this lineage of women he spoke of came from. Elijah revealed an ancient order, a pact among old families to protect the world's portals, and how my blood was part of it. My father, it seemed, wasn't merely ignorant of this heritage. He was the keeper of a secret meant to silence the gift I'd inherited. With each revelation, the world around me began to unravel. At church, they started suspecting my behavior. Sisters asked if I was straying from faith. My father began following me discreetly, and my mother, in a rare moment of courage, came to my room one night, sat on the edge of my bed, and said in a trembling voice, "If you're seeing, don't speak, not to him." It was the first time I realized she knew too, that perhaps she'd seen, that maybe at some point she'd been called and chose silence. The lake, once a mirror, began to act as a passage. When I approached, I saw scenes that weren't my memories, but felt like they were. I saw a woman with dark hair judged in a public square, another holding a book, burning, another kneeling before a child drawing symbols in the earth. Always the same face, always the same eyes, mine. Elijah said they were echoes, fragments of all who came before me. "You are their reflection," he whispered. And now the last. There was no turning back. Each encounter with Elijah, each vision in the lake, tore me further from the world they'd built for me. My father's sermons sounded hollow, like echoes of a faith that no longer fit me. The altar, once sacred, now felt like a disguised prison. And yet, I pretended. Outwardly, I remained the obedient daughter, sitting in the front pew with a Bible in my lap, eyes lowered. But inside, a silent revolution brewed. I was awakening. Elijah began meeting me outside the lake, in dreams. He appeared at the edge of wakefulness and sleep, a presence piercing the fabric of reality. His words came as whispers, instructions, warnings. "They know. They'll try to silence you." I didn't know who they were, but I felt their eyes. Church brothers watched me more closely. Certain congregants seemed restless when I approached, as if my body carried something impure. The weight of suspicion grew with each step. But more unsettling still, the lake began reacting to my emotions. On days of anguish, it churned without wind. On days of courage, it showed passages, images, voices, as if it wanted to teach me, prepare me. And then one afternoon, I saw my father's face reflected there, but not as the man I knew. He was younger, kneeling by the lake, shouting words I couldn't hear. Elijah told me he too had been called, that he'd seen and chose to deny. That's when everything fell apart. I was summoned to a prayer meeting. My father, my mother, and 2 church elders. They said they were concerned for my soul, that I seemed distracted, that visions could be traps of the enemy. They spoke with feigned kindness, but their eyes burned with fear. When they asked directly if I saw things in the lake, something in me broke. I told the truth. With a steady voice, I said, "I see what you don't have the courage to face." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. My mother lowered her eyes. My father rose slowly and left the room without looking back. That night, I was forbidden to leave the house. They took my phone, my Bible, my freedom, locked doors, claiming care and protection. But they didn't know the lake was already within me, that nothing in the physical world could stop what had awakened. When I closed my eyes, Elijah was there, and he wasn't alone. Around him, dozens of women, different, from different times, but with the same gaze that burned in me. That night I understood. I was the heir to something silenced for centuries. And now they were afraid, because they hadn't silenced me. That morning, when the sun finally flooded the room as if to pull me from the night's darkness, something in me had been decided, not with words, not with storybook courage, but with the quiet resolve of one who no longer accepts being shaped. They'd surrounded me with walls, prayers, and commandments, but forgot that an awakened soul cannot be tamed. I rose slowly, took a deep breath, and walked to the mirror. My eyes were no longer the same. There was a calm, ancient fire in them, the kind of gaze that recognizes not just the pain it carries, but the strength it inherited. And there, staring at my own reflection, I knew what I had to do. Return to the lake one last time, with truth, with surrender, without fear. I waited for the early hours. When the house fell silent and all were asleep, I opened my bedroom window and climbed down the roof as I had as a child, escaping long services. The path through the forest felt denser, as if nature itself knew what was coming. With each step, my heart quickened, but not from dread, from recognition. I wasn't heading into the unknown. I was going home. When I reached the lake, Elijah was at the shore, but not alone. The women from the reflection stood behind him in a circle, and the lake gleamed like liquid silver. Elijah approached, extended his hand without touching me, and said only, "It's time to remember who you are." The waters began to rise, not flooding the land, but spiraling upward. The images returned, sharper, more intense. Women in flight, others in protective rituals, an entire lineage bearing not just gifts, but wounds opened by silence. And at the center, like an echo of them all, me. Elijah revealed that the portal's time was closing, that I had to choose, erase everything and return to fitting the world they wanted for me, or accept the burden and freedom of being the link that reopens the passage to what was forgotten. I cried, because choosing meant losing. It meant breaking with everything. It meant never again being the perfect daughter, the church girl, the promise my father so fiercely defended. But it also meant being whole for the first time. I stepped forward without looking back. When my feet touched the water, it wasn't cold. It was alive. And then everything around me vanished. All that remained was the sound of my own heart, the weight of the lineage, and a certainty I had remembered. When I opened my eyes, the world was no longer the same. Or perhaps it was, but I wasn't. I lay by the lake's edge, my dress soaked and clinging to my body, my skin covered in a faint mist, as if time itself had touched me. The sky was still dark, but it wasn't night. There was a sourceless, diffuse light, as if the world breathed with me. Elijah was gone, as were the women, the visions. But the lake remained calm, mirroring my face with precision. Only this time, I was the one staring back, with awareness. For the first time, my reflection didn't scare me. It recognized me. I rose slowly. My legs trembled, but not from fear. It was like walking with a new body, denser, more awake, as if I carried centuries of memories. Each leaf in the forest seemed to whisper my name. And as I neared the trail back, I noticed something had changed outwardly too. My skin felt firmer, my eyes darker, and my hands tingled as if holding something I didn't yet fully understand. It was as if the ancestral gift now lived there, quiet but pulsing. I returned home with a light body and an anchored soul. My parents were awake. My mother was crying. My father simply nodded as if finally understanding he'd fought against something greater than himself. I hugged them, and in that embrace, I let go of the girl I'd tried to be. I stayed silent, because sometimes presence speaks louder than any explanation. In the days that followed, life tried to resume as before, but there was no fitting back into old molds. I went to church, but the pulpit's words sounded shallow. I joined family dinners, but it was as if I occupied a borrowed space. The world around didn't know, but I carried a secret in my blood, a legacy that pulsed quietly, demanding passage. The visions didn't stop. The lake kept calling even when I didn't go. Vivid dreams found me in the early hours, symbols, voices, forgotten names. My body responded before my mind. It was as if I were becoming something more, or perhaps just returning to who I'd always been. The community noticed. People whispered. Some averted their eyes. Others approached with questions disguised as prayers. An elderly woman touched my shoulder at church's end and whispered, "You remember, don't you?" I remembered too, when I was young. It cut me, because I realized so many before me had felt this call. So many were silenced, so many quieted themselves to survive. But I wouldn't stay silent. Elijah didn't return in body or image, but I felt him, in everything, in the wind stirring the leaves around me, in the water's shimmer, in the dreams that cradled me. He was now part of what I'd become, and with him, all the women who carried the same invisible name etched in their souls, the mark. Then the signs intensified. One morning in the mirror, I saw symbols on my skin, faint traces like scars, but they vanished when I touched them. Another night, I dreamed of 3 women calling me by a name that wasn't Sheyla, but rang true, Leora. And in the dream, one said, "It's with this name you'll open what was sealed." My father noticed the change and tried to reach me. In a way, he never had. He called me to pray, but there was more plea than authority in his voice. He said that as a young man, he too had heard things, but they convinced him it was madness, that it was sin, and he believed them. I listened, but didn't respond, because there was nothing more he could give me. I forgave him, but I couldn't follow him. That night I returned to the lake, not as before, not seeking answers, but as one returning to her own center, and the lake welcomed me in silence, like an old guardian. The water was still, the starry sky reflected in it, and at the center, my reflection, strong, whole, awake. At the lake's edge, alone before a mirror that revealed far more than the world dared accept, I finally understood. It wasn't about magic, nor gifts, nor even disobedience. It was about return, about breaking the cycles of silence, about giving voice to the women who were silenced, strength to those who were shaped, and a path to those yet to come. I wasn't the first, but perhaps the last who could still choose. And in that choice, simple and sacred, there was power. Not the power to control, but to remember. That early morning, the lake began to glow. Not spectacularly, not like the visions of the past. It was a serene glow, like a calm breath after a long cry. The surface rippled slowly, and from its depths, the images appeared one last time. Elijah, now distant, walking among trees not of this world. The women who visited my dreams, forming a circle in an open field, each lighting a small flame, and at the center, my reflection, smiling. It was a farewell and a birth at once, a silent confirmation that the cycle had closed and also begun anew. When the light faded, everything became profoundly calm. The wind stopped, the water rested, and within me, a new sensation. I was whole. For the first time, I carried no guilt. I had no questions. I didn't crave approval. I knew who I was, and that was enough. I returned home with a light body and an anchored soul. My parents were awake. My mother was crying. My father simply nodded, as if finally understanding he'd fought against something greater than himself. I hugged them, and in that embrace, I let go of the girl I'd tried to be. I stayed silent, because sometimes presence speaks louder than any explanation. In the days that followed, I returned to the lake only to give thanks. The reflection became just a reflection, without images or voices. But I knew it was all still, there, and always would be. When others come, when others are called, the lake will know. And they will know. I am Sheyla. But I am also Leora. I am a pastor's daughter, and heir to women who chose to remember. And as long as I live, none of us will be forgotten. Years passed. The town continued with its Sunday services, its quiet traditions, its well-dressed fears. My father aged in peace, quieter, as if learning that faith and control aren't the same. My mother began to smile with her eyes again, as if something in her had finally been freed, perhaps because, in me, she saw herself as she might have been. As for me, I didn't leave. I stayed, steady, calm, free. I became a woman who listens more than she speaks, who observes more than she accuses, because those who know the weight of truth need prove nothing to anyone. I returned to the lake through many seasons. Sometimes the water only reflected the sky. Other times, it whispered names. One day I found a girl sitting on the opposite shore, eyes alert, breath held. She didn't see me, but I knew. The lake had chosen again. Smiling, I closed my eyes and gave thanks. Because now I understand. The call was never just mine.